So I conduct my research in the vibrant field of painting, focusing on human entanglements with animals, plants, and consumable energy. My paintings reflect on our troubled connections to the natural world and draw viewers into their comparative logic. This morning, I'm going to tell you about my influences and how works I've made for the Open Studio during lockdown relate to my past works. The Open Studio has been an opportunity to make works that are reflexive, that is, to make works about making. So I want to begin with an excerpt of my recent animation, Net Casting. This is on show in the Open Studio space. Now, I hope you've had a cup of coffee and are not triggered by the sound of this brewing coffee. Brewing palette, I should say. The title of this animation, Net Casting, alludes to the process of casting lines out to find meaning. As artists, we are problem finders, not just problem solvers. By casting a net out, we find moments to relate within a meshwork of interwoven history, power, ideas, and life forms. Nets, webs, and patterns have been a recent materialization in my work. I'll go back to the rest of the animation if we have a bit of time. So the most significant shift in my practice recently has been this idea of using Peruvian textiles, which I find fascinating. They are full of symbols, motifs, and meaning. And they're a way of embodying this idea of nets and webs. Throughout my lecture, descriptions of my Open Studio works will unfold in tandem with works I describe. I will then take you through my curatorial project, Threads, which is accompanying the Open Studio interactive zone. It's an exhibition of works that condenses and binds my ideas together. And to conclude, I'll go back to the rest of my animation if we haven't run out of time. But first I need to establish that I work makes that are speculative. By that I mean they are not entirely based on existing knowledge, rather they conjure new ideas. Central to this is a connection to dream, imagination, and freedom, and the power of art to imagine new possibilities. As such, the content of my paintings is often poetic, metaphysical, and oblique, despite underpinning politics. Importantly, while painting remains core to my practice, it often acquires or expands its significance in its interrelationship with other mediums, such as light, sculpture, sound, and the kinetic. The works influence each other. One body of work might change the evolution of subsequent bodies. So let's use this idea as a segue into a concrete poem I made, entitled The Surface of Language, which is a collection of stones containing a distinct line or vein of quartz that was used as a starting point. The characteristic of the line combined with the form of the stone was used to conceive the words and their fragments and then arranged as sentences. They very much point to the materiality of language. And painting is also materially formed. It has a natural affinity with earth and stones, because on the one hand, there is the common materiality of minerals from which pigments are stored or sourced, sorry. On the other hand, just as forms potentially lie in the earth, paintings may be said to be awaiting embodiment in the initial blank canvas or empty space of a support. This is a piece that's sitting within the Open Studio space called Lie in Wait, because it's not finished and forms potentially lie in waiting. The idea of paint as having an affinity to earth is central to one of the works in my Open Studio project, Elective Affinities. During lockdown, we all had time to tackle the order of our homes. I sorted through a collection of laboratory vessels I've stored for over 20 years and decided to fuse them with painting. Liquidity mediates paint inside the vessels and suggests that experiments with coloured matter have taken place. My studio is definitely a chemistry lab of intoxicating colour at times. The laboratory vessels make this relationship between matter, meaning, and painting explicit. Some are monochromes, others contain techniques of dripping, pouring, or even blowing. They embody gesture and the passage of time across their glass. Together, they point to the fact that paintings aren't hermetically sealed objects. They are part of a network, and their agency is distorted and magnified by their visibility. This work, Elective Affinities, includes images from art history that mirror the act of creation. For example, it recalls Duchamp's glasswork, The Bride Stripped Bare by Her Bachelor, a title that alludes to the alchemical marriage of quicksilver and sulfur, which is alluded to in this coupling here. In his romance novel, Elective Affinities, after which the work is titled, the poet-scientist Goethe notes how materials seek out one another, attract, seize, destroy, devour, consume one another, and emerge. Extending this idea to romantic couples, he states 4 entities, people previously joined in 2 pairs, are brought into contact, abandon their previous union, and join together afresh. And this couplet vessel here contains images of both of my parents dancing together. Another of the works is a hand-painted reproduction of Jean Chardin's Soap Bubble, where the figure is engrossed in the Pygmalion act of breathing life into the morphine globule of soap. Its transforming surface is, as the theorist Mitchell suggests, a natural correlative for Chardin's own engrossment in the act of painting. The black mirrored surface on which the vessels sit remind me of Alberti's analogy between painting and mirrors. What is painting but the act of embracing, by means of art, the surface of the pool? The black mirror is also a reference to absence. Every image is a representation of an absence, an illusion. In another Open Studio work, I've used shadows of the vessels to create a cavernous studio space, flowchart of affinities, in which translucent shadows mediate words related to materials and processes in art and other disciplines such as science. Some of these words include bend, align, unify, disperse, part, relate, scatter, fuse, add, and extract. This work also recalls the ancient art of skiography, tracing shadows to make a painting. So now I'm going to move to 2 paintings which belong to the Quagoma James Saurus collection. Both works quote the language of the symbolists. These early large-scale oil paintings interweave signifiers of culture, such as cars and fighter jets, with apparently natural forms, desert storm camouflage, fine fossil plant structures, terns, and swallows. Layers of oil paint build up like strata, and I interweave forms by looking for structural affinities. In Pathfinder Closing, a couple flee the foreboding structure of the 4-wheel drive. In the background, a looming storm, composed by tracing the shape of a geranium leaf, presents structural affinities between the small and the macro. The lobed form of a leaf bears a structural affinity to a cumulus cloud. Similarly, in choreography of war reportage, the aerodynamic form of the birds is similar to the fighter jet. Working with formal affinities, structural morphology, and analogy allows me to interweave combinations of different things, and at times, this kind of work can dissolve hierarchical divisions. Let's look at another work from the collection, Dream Weapon, or another couple of works. But first I'll show you this work here, Binary Love. These works were taken or are part of a series entitled The Crevice, which was shown at Milani Gallery in Brisbane. And they look at the material earth as a transforming thing. In these works, inspired by a trip to the Kimberley, the form of the crevice lends shape to the split, but the dialectic of the split, a term that implies rupture and limitation, becomes a site that conflates the natural and the cultural. These works were inspired by a feeling I had when I was shopping within supermarket walls. I thought, how can I reframe this commercial artificial space, one that represents the interface of human activity and the exploitation of nature? I began to think of it as a site of gathering from the earth, which is what we are essentially doing. In Binary Love, which is part of the UQ art collection, a figure contemplates the transforming supermarket wall that terminates in stone and then collapses. Walls seem to dematerialize from a state of monumental solidity into a vaporous, meandering, airbrushed line. In Dream Weapon, which is from the Quagoma collection, the horizontally aligned walls of the crevice assume a womb-like structure, the boulder rock, perhaps an egg. In dreams, dark spaces are the underground world of burial, symbolized by the cold dark of the tomb. The protagonist here appears primordial. Her grotesque head is based on a branch resembling a hair. The large bone she wields might deliver a low blow to the supermarket wall, knock the meaning out of it from within. The theorist Howard Kegel proposes works of art are posed, lingering between creation and destruction. In viewing them, one anticipates the event of their passing out of being. Here the figure is poised to ruin, propelling arsenal of dreams, so to speak. I often like to include a female protagonist in my works. As I said, her grotesque head is based on a branch resembling a hair. I want to use this idea of how forms like the branch trigger resemblances and activate ideas as a segue into my second work for the Open Studio, Structural Affinities. Sorry, it's the third because I showed you flowchart of affinities. I see the potential to project subject or object-like qualities into these sea sponges. Here's a studio shot. I see the forms are convoluted, globular, squat tubular, hole encrusted, fanned, arborescent, planar, and spherical. Artists often breathe life into inanimate materials and transform them into something they resemble or structurally evoke. I made this work during lockdown as well. A home studio is a great place. I used the clothesline to make this work. The sponges are primed with rabbit skin glue and coloured with pigment, further activating the vitalistic potential of their forms. Indeed, the colour makes the sponges appear more alive. They are a unique form of life. They are actually the only animal that, when broken down to the level of their cells, can reconfigure into an entirely new configuration. So participants will observe the sponges in the cabinets and draw their forms into gridded paper. And I ask the participants if the form reminds them of something else to transform it into the resemblance. I'm now going to skim over some works from my exhibition Hollow Mark. And at the end of the next 3 or 4 slides, we can pause for some questions. I'm not going to talk to these. Okay, so there's no questions yet. So I'm going to thank you, Michael Griffiths, for your comment. Michael Griffiths, I'm sorry. It's lovely to see the vivid meshwork your painting manifest as animation. Thank you. Hopefully you'll get to see a bit more. And yeah, thanks Marie Farr for loving the colours. Okay, so in this piece here, you can see the deflated form of the globe and Australia crumpled underneath all of these lines. So similarly crushed or deflated are my work Spectra of Birds. So this is a work I made when I first moved to Wollongong from Brisbane. It's part of a series of sculptural birds which embodies a more expansive view of the potential for painting through the use of colour, sculptural form and encaustic wax mixed with pigments. The abstract planes of colour recall the work of colourfield painter Madeleine Kelly. These birds were spotted in the Illawarra and are the first of a series of bird sculptures. In these works, abstract images of birds are squeezed or trapped into the rectilinear architecture of empty Tetra Paks. The sculptures reveal a relationship between abstraction and extraction and how these words both imply a removal of sorts. Tetra Paks are associated with devastating extractive practices of living, destructive to human forms of life. So these are all the birds I've made to date. And I made these Leipzig birds during a residency in Leipzig. Their very abstract bodies suggest a distinct objecthood that I actually began to pursue in my next body of work with the human figure, Existential Needs. So the residency at Leipzig was at the Spinnerei, which is the cotton mill, the Leipzig cotton mill. I was drawn to experimenting with woven fabrics as a result, and I made a series of 18 frottages of kitchen stoves on wool, cotton and nylon and other fabrics. Each image appears as a one-to-one blueprint or diagram and corresponds to our corporal expectations. As a collection, they resemble skins, eyes, and breasts, and also appear as human bodies. Their rather rigid typology suggests a canon of allowable forms to which our bodies are forced to conform, as well as the labor of the human body, which is as domestic, ruled, and sexual. The stove, which is traditionally a site associated with female labor, here literally becomes embodied into a kind of psychological and material skin. And in the open studio, keep an eye out for a book I'm showing entitled Forms of Agency. It's on a timed loop in the gallery space. And the first half of the book features images of the women who worked at the Leipzig cotton mill during the GDR. And these are juxtaposed beside images I have photographed while doing the rounds of biennales and triennales around the world, as well as images of these stovetop rubbings. So after making the bird works and the stovetop rubbings, I wanted to make a painting. I couldn't return to the kind of painting I'd been making before, and I wanted to make a painting that was painterly but echoed these rectilinear formations. I began to look at the graphic vocabulary of Peruvian textile designs because I noticed there was a synergy there between those and the rectilinear formations. As a child, I was surrounded by fine textile motifs, courtesy of my parents, and I now merge the flat pictorial arrangements of textiles with biological forms in my work. This new compositional method is a significant shift in my practice. It allows me to depict surreal narratives as if they are part of a complex geometric iconographic system. Designs of alternating patterns coexist alongside naturalistic imagery that sometimes suggests sexual reproduction or a pattern to be copied or a model to be copied to make a pattern. I made this work here by rubbing the form of a dish rack. So these were all experiments with how to increase the rectilinear formations in my work by forcing them into these structures. But my first major work using the flat textile-like method was here in the trawler. The trawler is an awkward giant with arms that terminate in fish hooks. Its head, a crane, denotes the utilitarian mentality of industrialized fishing. Blocks of colour encode a human face. Around its figure, squares and diamonds form the foundation for a pattern of albatross. Here you can see the transforming portrait of a person moving through this fairly demanding figure. And the very flat pattern-like texture that moves through the composition. How to look at a hexagon where I'm very much working within the constraints of a particular pattern. But I needed images and content, figurative elements that could fuse with the abstraction. I didn't like how flat the paintings were getting. So I discovered I enjoyed drawing from life by making 3 dimensions compress into 2 dimensions. I now find ways to, I now draw lines in and out of different gridded or isometric structures to mediate my vision. This process requires close observation and some abstraction. As in a textile, the warp of what I know and the weft of what I see are woven into one another. So after pollinating my pumpkin flowers with a paintbrush in my garden, I began thinking about the way a paintbrush works too. In the pollinated, the wilted parts of the pumpkin flower appear as parts of a faceted crystal vessel or womb, while their whole forms are reminiscent of Giacomo-Bala's futurist flowers. My brain wanted to say Giacometti there. The resulting archetypal mythological figures combine the modernist languages of cubism and futurism. Here, the paintbrush is a cross-fertilizing tool. I like the way that the paintbrush relates to Adorno's idea that art is always infused with a shot of the extra artistic. It needs something heterogeneous to itself to become art, he wrote. In the absence of that, the process that every work of art is lacks a target and so just freewheels. So the idea of affinities resonates with this idea of heterogeneity. Materials and meanings create a kind of friction. Each work is living matter. Artist and work symbiotically shape one another. The overarching prompt of my artist studio reflects this. My work is like an ecosystem. It is very much alive. The relationship between myself and my work is symbiotic, and the audience is activated by the affinities at play. And did you know that the brush tip tongue of a honeyeater functions the same way as a paintbrush? So here is the honeyeater's tongue, and it has a brush on it as well. So this idea kind of suggests that biospheric ecology and artistic agency might mirror one another. In this work here, Allowable Forms and Unconscious Facts, circular stovetops resemble an egg, eyes and breasts, while a slumped head confronted by an eyeball sperm balloon points to a troubled developmental stage for humanity. Bodily connotations ride on domestic ones. And you can see how the stovetop rubbings actually fed into my paintings. I'm now going to talk about 2 shows I had last year, and a work from each show is actually in the open studio. So this is my exhibition Spin Out Spun In that was at Milani Gallery. And in this work, I explored the aesthetic potential of circles, light and colour in relation to modernism's legacy and inherited unstable environmental and socio-economic ground. In Me and My Rhythm Box, figures are inverted and reversed to evoke a syntax. The rhythm box suggests ecological movement, the endless repetition of economic systems, or the living beat or pulse of a body. They contain structural affinities between formal radiation and the sun, a lot of the works do, and concentric circles connect to the transforming matter in this work to the spherical vessels in elective affinities. I made some works about birds that I'm not going to go into because I don't think I'll have time, but you can see them here. They're all devoted to a particular artist they were made after. This is my kinetic work, Mama Oklo. Anyone who's been in any of my classes in the last 8 years might have seen me spinning these discs on fans in the classroom. And ever since demonstrating that the optical mixing of colour via the fans, I've dreamt of actually creating this work. And when I first met my colleague John Tonkin, I told him I had this dream of making this work, and he helped me realise the mechanics and the data behind making these spinning discs rotate. And so I'm eternally indebted to him for the realisation of this work. So let me just move on here. Oops, actually, I'll wait on that work. The kinetic work Mama Oklo transforms painting into an immersive spatio-temporal and sonic field, drawing from the work of James Clerk Maxwell, who employed spinning discs to explore the differences in mixing light and mixing pigments. I'm exploring the effect of those colours. In Incan mythology, though, Mama Oklo, a fertility goddess, taught women the act of spinning thread. Her magical pre-modern origin reflects the generative revolutions of the structure. In this work, light is a metaphoric thread of vibrant transitions reflected from the spinning parts of the coloured spectrum. Yet the harmonic vibration and wailing sound suggests humanity's low blow on natural systems. Okay, this is another work from this is another show that was exhibited at Ipswich Gallery. Just checking the time here, and I'm right to say we still have half an hour. That's correct, right? So I have moved through these a little bit faster than I anticipated. I might go back to a point I was going to make about this work, Mama Oklo. I like the way that in this piece, painting embodies the labour of its maker, and it works against the logic of an economic system that, according to prominent theorist Isabella Graw, is busy absorbing life. And in this work, I ask, how might pre-digital and semi-redundant technologies, such as revolving discs, combine with vibrant painting to contribute to philosophical ideas of painting as full of liveliness? And the breathing palette that you saw earlier on also alluded to that idea that painting is really part of a vibrant network, and this is a very alive web of ideas and meaning. So I'm going to stop for some questions after the next 3 slides, and I won't go into too much about these works. Axis of Dream, where a figure can be seen hugging a horse. And Stair Ghost, which is based on an exit sign. Okay. Hi, Emanuela. Yes, Emanuela was a student of mine at the University of Wollongong, and she can remember me talking about the coloured spinning discs. Okay, Michael is asking a question, and I just need to see if I can scroll back through the chat to something about coral evoking sponges you have more recently done. How do I think about the resonances between these small works? I can't see the beginning of that question. I'm sorry, Lucinda. Just trying to scroll through, but it's not seeming to work. Okay, Spectra of Birds anticipates the series of coral evoking sponges you have more recently done. Yes. How do you think about the resonances between these small works? I suppose they're both collections of very brightly coloured forms that pertain to the natural world. I have actually worked with the sponges before, and they're both connected to the fact that I am, I suppose, a little bit of a naturalist. Sometimes I even wonder whether I'm a pantheist. And all the time I'm collecting things. So both of the works, I suppose, are interlinked by the fact that I'm very fascinated by natural history, even archaeology. Catherine is asking me a question as well. Catherine Sawyer, thank you for coming. Madeleine, with Mama Okla, were the colour combinations intentional or random? They seem to me like paint palettes or colour wheels, helping me form new connections with colours in combination. Yes, Catherine, or Kat as we know you, the colours were actually based on a logical formula. So I started with one particular work that Maxwell made, where the red, yellow and blue were in a particular configuration. And then I came up with every combination of those 3 colours within that same pattern. So I think I was able to get about 9 or possibly 16 different combinations of the red, yellow and blue within the parameters of that particular diagrammatic circular structure. So once I exhausted the possibilities of those combinations, I started to come up with my own that was still more or less in keeping with the ones that I'd started with, so that I didn't lose track of, so the composition was still kind of intact and cohesive. Probably my favorite discovery when I started to expand into my own combinations was that the use of white created a beautiful flashing high key color that I find a little even more mesmeric, I suppose. Okay, I can't see any more questions. So let's see. I can also see other questions in the Q&A. Thank you, I've just discovered them. Okay, thank you, Sarah Tui. Okay. Susan Bell, you are very How do you use your space and time so well? Well, I am always working. Actually, I'm going to create more space for doing nothing and more time for listening and not talking. That's my plan once this project is over. All right, so I'm going to keep moving, and please forgive me if I've missed one of your questions. I'm not very good at coordinating any scrolling in this platform, so if it was an important question, repost it, and maybe Lucinda can also draw my attention to it. Okay, so this is my exhibition Threads, and this accompanies the Open Studio. It provides insight and presents an ecology of art, threads, and life. It explores the idea of weaving what we see with what we know and dream. The images weave disparate ideas together and entwine formations of webs, wombs, and patterns to remind us that many species form a fabric with a key material thread. This interconnection is crucial, showing how the liveliness of an artwork can extend to that of the living planet. Okay, threads were among the earliest transmitters of meaning, said Bauhaus artist Annie Albers. In these prints, Albers conjoins graphic images with those of Andean textile design. The lines are enlivened through colour and interchanging rhythm. Albers dedicated her book on weaving to the weavers of ancient Peru. These textiles down the bottom of the screen here are also exhibited beside her works, and they're part of my personal collection. I bought these from the Good Shepherd Trading Circle, Brisbane, and they work for the women who are from the Creation Agustina Rivas, which is an organisation for the promotion and of the women of Cucari, Cusco, Peru. So it builds their capacity to sell their work. Circles and radiating forms enliven many of the works in the curatorial component. As if yearning for enlightenment, on the left here we see John Brack's sun lamps. 3 lamps gather together in deep thought. Bodily connotations ride on domestic ones. Their bent necks and peering eyes suggest they are oculate beings. Though the lamps can in no way see, they express the paradoxical coincidence that the sun, emitter of light, appears as the eye, receiver of light. I've included this work here by actually, I'm going to talk about this sundew work. The sundew's tiny arms explode like fireworks and terminate in sticky filaments, numerous mini replicas of each other. Hall's work draws attention to structural affinities between the micro and the macro. On the left here, I've included a work of mine from an exhibition I had last year, and it's titled Window Bandit. And it is based on a photograph of a potter wasp trying to escape through my studio window, battling its reflection. So because it was based on it appeared in my studio and was a painting of something that happened in my studio, I decided to include it in the Open Studio facsimile. These wasps are in the family Vespertae, and they build mud pot nests. So I decided to include this seed carrier pot from Peru underneath the potter's wasps. On the right here, you can see a really old painting of mine, and the half-translucent figure seems to float before the surface of a pool. This was made during my 3rd year of study at the Queensland College of Art and was somehow inspired by the evocative existential presence of Madonna Staunton's works made from clothing. I initially learnt of Donna's works through an exhibition at the Queensland Art Gallery, and later I was lucky to work with her in her home studio at Bennett Road, The Gap, where I grew up. This is one of my favourite works from the collection, and I never ever can forget seeing this piece. And it's kind of a key work in the Threads exhibition. It's called Fingerbox. The cross-contour lines of AO's Fingerbox were inspired by looking through a prism. Like a spider that spins its web, a figure pulls coloured thread from its womb, perhaps to create coloured copies of itself, or further spin its landscape. One might go so far as to say the work illustrates the idea that the matter of the womb is derived from the material feminine, the word matter itself attaining meaning from the word maternal. This work is poignant as it points to the politics of reproduction that recognises the multiple dimensions of human life.